Well, I think the attacks 3 weeks ago in the so-called Operation 1027 were unprecedented in scope and in speed and the number of groups involved. And I think it really took the Myanmar army by surprise. And then that was quickly followed by other anti-regime forces throughout the country staging their own attacks. So I think that this is probably the most dire situation the military has faced in many decades, probably since independence in 1948.
Are they managing to bring it under control, or do you think it is gaining a momentum that is going to continue to challenge them?
I think that they haven't been able to bring it under control in the last 3 weeks. So I think there's still a great deal of uncertainty about where this is all headed. But they are facing really quite significant armed challenges in multiple fronts, multiple locations, from multiple very sophisticated insurgent organizations that seem to be working very well together. Where the challenge, I think, really is that this is a very asymmetric conflict. And even though the Myanmar army have taken a lot of casualties since the coup in early 2021, they have high technology on their side. They have lots of air power. The insurgents don't have any. They have lots of heavy artillery, but they don't necessarily have those troop reinforcements to go on and take back this territory. So I think it's still too early to know where this is going. But certainly what is clear is that that the anti-SAC resistance really have taken the initiative so far.
And David, there have been reports that perhaps the junta is resorting to even using chemical weapons. Is there any veracity to that, do you know?
Well, it's very difficult to confirm these reports. On the one hand, they're quite serious reports that are difficult to independently verify. And we've heard these reports during the civil war for many, many years. But on the other hand, you're dealing with a regime that is incredibly ruthless and resorts to wide-scale arson and the mass murder of civilians. So using chemical weapons, if indeed it can be proven, I think that's very important to stress, then we shouldn't be surprised that this is a regime that will do anything to stay in power.
It is interesting because in the years since the junta took control, they've been able to quell these or quash these insurgencies. Is it your sense that they have become a lot better organised? Do you think that they are perhaps getting support from outside the country?
I think what we're seeing, especially with the Three Brotherhood Alliance, this group of three organisations up in the north, but with several allies that they've actually helped train. This is a mixture of old and new wars. These three groups, the Kokang, the MNDAA, as they're called, the Arakan Army and the Ta'ang National Liberation Army, they were all formed together back in 2009. And they've trained and fought together and operated in very different locations. And since the coup, they've very quietly been helping some of the other post-coup resistance forces. They're not under the control of the National Unity Government. I think that there's been some misreporting around that. They planned and executed this operation with their allies, unbeknownst to the National Unity Government and taking the military, as we said, by surprise. Now, given that a lot of this activity has occurred along the China border, it's inconceivable that the Chinese authorities were unaware that this was going on. And given that most of these groups are actually supplied by weapons that are originating either from China or coming through China, it certainly is, I think, quite telling that the Chinese have expressed in a very passive-aggressive way a disappointment with the State Administration Council, with the Myanmar military junta, and have basically given some form, we're not sure what colour it was, but some kind of colour-coded go-ahead to this operation taking place. So that's something to watch very closely.
That is very interesting. So do you think the junta will reach out to China to try and change that direction?
I think that they already have, and they've been trying to curry favour with China. But I think one of the disappointments for China is that the military simply haven't had this post-coup dividend of ensuring stability along this quite important trade route. And China has 33 memorandums of understanding that it signed with the previous government before the pandemic in early 2020. To build infrastructure projects, railways and road projects all the way to the Indian Ocean. And I think it's getting very frustrated that it can't move forward with that, and that it appears that the Myanmar military is militarily, politically and socially incapable actually seeking that kind of stability and either crushing the resistance or incorporating them in some way. And it's also probably fairly miffed that that the SAC, the Myanmar military regime, spends more of its time pretending to be very close friends with Russia instead of taking China's concerns very seriously. So I think that is a very important factor. That said, there's a lot of speculation around that, and we simply don't know. But certainly, I think Operation 1027 a few weeks ago is indicative of the Chinese expressing their displeasure in ways that we wouldn't have been able to see a couple of years ago.
Which is fascinating. So how do you think it might embolden the broader population to try and get rid of this junta?
Well, I think in the past few years, we've seen multiple forms of resistance. We've seen armed resistance from old and new armies and lots of fighting in places that were relatively quiet before the coup in Sagaing and in the northwest and other areas. I think that the levels of urban insurgency of underground cells in the cities attacking junta targets, but also suspected informants, it's become very nasty at times. That's certainly gone up and down over the past 2.5 years. And I think the last 3-4 months, we've really seen probably the lowest point of urban insurgency. And then a lot of peaceful protests through the civil disobedience movement, some quite inventive, peaceful, flash protests and things. That seems to have gone down a bit now. But again, this is an environment of great uncertainty. People are both angry at the misrule of the military, but also declining living standards, access to electricity, the rising cost of living. Things are, life in Myanmar is getting desperate, even for people who are not in active conflict zones. So I think we should be watching a large part of the population and how they're going to react to this. But certainly from what we've been hearing from various sources is that people in Yangon and Mandalay and the big cities have been watching 1027 quite closely. And hoping that this kind of does sound the final death notice of the military.
Yeah, it could be something of a turning point. Really good to get your analysis, David. Thank you.
Thank you.